Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Steele. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here to the 125th anniversary of the Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape, and Design, of which we are the newest members. We're Visual Studies. I'm very glad to introduce this topic, the future of creativity. I can tell you from looking at the work that I have seen of these three, the future's looking very, very good. So without further ado, I will introduce everyone. Claude Cormier is based in Montreal and will be speaking first. Jimenez Lai is at UCLA at this stage, and Benjamin Dillenburger is here in Toronto with the Daniels faculty. So Claude, I will ask you to join us. And actually, before I do that, before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to thank our friends at Herman Miller who have provided the furniture for our discussion, which is very beautiful. I'll be taking my chair with me. And we appreciate the opportunity to showcase Herman Miller's award-winning design, and it'll look just great. I know where I'll put it. Claude.
Thank you very much. There are certain things that do not change, like the heat in this room during the summertime. It brings me back in the 80s when I was here. So 1982, 1986, this is when I was doing my undergrad at university. And I just feel after 30 years that I'm just actually starting my career. It's a long thing, right? So I came here as an Aggie from Guelph, from science. And I think I just want to somehow trying to focus on the 5 minutes. Today, it's from how the science, I move into the kind of a more creative aspect. And I think U of T is a big part of that. Ed 5, one of my professor, always hitting hard of, have the courage of your idea, no whining, stand up. Jim Belisle taught me this notion of philosophy that we can talk about ideas and you can talk about it. What is it? What's clear? What's not clear? And I would also say an important one is Blanche, who took me when I was at my thesis students because I was taking my site, I was excavating my site completely out, and there's no one who wanted to supervise me. And Blanche took me under her wing, and I think it taught me courage. She taught me risk-taking is good, resilience, and also the love for a profession. So I think U of T has been a very major way of teaching an attitude about our work. 5 projects quickly. I just want to put the emphasis on what we do. I think it's beyond ecology, yes, sustainability, yes, but I think there's a bigger overriding principle, which is this notion of optimism, pleasure, and hope. Sugar Beach that everybody knows, but it has this kind of it's a place that has its own chemistry, and it's something that it's composed by understanding where it is at that moment it was done, and also pushing the political aspect to make this happen. And 5 years now in life, Sugar Beach has its own life, and it has a kind of celebrating the city, celebrating the lake, celebrating, I would say, the new personality of Toronto, which is embracing the world. A project in the making at Berksey Park, just behind the Flatiron Building. We're trying to create a piece that's going to bring all the different users. The families are moving in, the dog user, the worker, the people that operate shops, people take breaks in the park, celebrating old Toronto, new Toronto. So it's this Berksey fountain, we could call, for this iconic element that actually talks about the history, but celebrating it and pushing it forward. History is not something that is dead, it's something that is alive and needs to be rehashed. The Boule Rose in the Gay Village in Montreal, 5 years edition. Every year during May to September, the streets are closed for traffic and people are brought in. There's street terrace, and once again, it's a very somehow sad neighborhood where there's street violence, drug, prostitution, kind of not a positive neighborhood. Principle of Jane Jacob, making your neighborhood part of your own community, getting the sense of people involved and bringing beauty and pride. It is 1 kilometer long, and now in the city, I think it's also transforming the ghetto. That's something that's become much more open in the city, and there's a more of a democratic attitude to it. Lipstick, 18 years old in Montreal at the convention center, using the brand of tourism and actually forcing them to accept something that was actually, if they express this internationally, we could somehow apply it in the real, and that was a fast-track project with engineering only. So the pink was a little bit hard, but you learn at some point that too much information, it doesn't help you. Last but not the least, it's the Holocaust Memorial, once again with this concept of hope. Lord Cultural created a team with Daniel Libinsky and Ed Berkinski, and they asked us to be part of this, and I did decline twice because it is so far removed from my culture, my religion, and all this, and not knowing much about this. And this is exactly what Libinsky said. He said, we need your hope within this, and you're going to work with us. So with Doris Bergen, the historian history on that, that was somehow the raison d'être that she filtered and made sure that everything was correctly assembled. And I have to say, it is one of the easiest projects in the making within a team, and I'm hoping that at the end, when it's going to be built in a year, that feeling is going to be expressed through the concrete and the site. Thank you.
So thank you for having me. So I was here a few months ago. For those of you who were here, sorry you have to suffer through it again. I went to school here. I graduated relatively recently, 8 years ago to be relatively exact. Had the great fortunes of having many of you as professors. Actually, George taught me, maybe accidentally taught me about some of my future mentors, such as Kipnis and Solmo, by accident, I think. But I felt very lucky to be here because, you know, when I was thinking about the future of creativity, I was thinking about the word creativity and the word future. If someone were to say, this guy is a little creative with rules, there's an implication of misbehaving, or there's an idea of standard. And so when we think about the word future, you know, we're thinking about the multiple paths that you can take. And the path that I took when I graduated from onset was start a practice, and that's what I did from day one, start a practice. So I'll show you this five slide slideshow is a chronology of what I've been doing since I graduated. And when I think about the futures of people that I look up to when I went to school here, there were 5 things consistently to the people that I admired. 5 things they did. They draw, they build, they write, they teach, they curate. It's very consistent. And so I wanted to do these 1 or 2 or all of these 5 things. And I began with maybe drawing. So having taken some cinema studies classes, and especially also art history classes in undergraduate here, I think storyboard or storytelling felt very natural to me. And the medium of cartoon that was associated with, you know, composition of lines also felt very natural to me as somebody who was trained in doing architectural drawings. And so I drew a whole book of comics called Citizens of No Place, which was published in 2012. And I'm also happy to report that the beginning of this book was done in this building. But how does one go about building when you draw these kinds of things? And the first thing I did was this object in installation art in Los Angeles, a building that rotates once an hour. So your body would conform to surfaces every 15 minutes when plan becomes section, becomes reflected ceiling plant, and so forth. The idea of exhausting your personal resources because you don't have a client felt really strong to me because I want to start a practice. So what do you do when you don't have clients yet? Eat Campbell soup cans and drink Pabst Blue Ribbon. And so I was living in that house. I built this house in Chicago, found a warehouse, 1,400 square feet for $1,000 a month, and I also had a teaching job at University of Illinois at Chicago. Built the briefcase house and was living in it. And it dawned on me that this was too big to be furniture and too small to be architecture. Was I doing architecture per se, or was I designing really, really large furniture? Escaping from that, we designed an installation art piece that was a continuation of too big to be furniture and too small to be architecture. And in this case, it's hard on the outside, soft on the inside, like a really large couch that could be tumbled around various orientations. I'm also happy to report that this was collected by MoMA, and it was exhibited last year. But the escape velocity of building and drawing, to me, if I'm interested in cartoons, is there a way of communicating the cartoonish sensibility of graphic architecture? Can we draw architecture in a way where it directly informs us what sections could be, what plans could be, what compositions could be like? And so I started going back to the comic book drawings in this way, thinking more directly about architecture. And a year after doing that, now I guess, last year and the year before, some of the cartoonish sensibility began to, I guess, bleed into the things that we build. The Speech Buster project for Storefront for Art and Architecture was something that we want to introduce the cartoonish curves and the optimistic, let's say, cartoonish colors. And the Township of Domestic Park project was the pavilion for Taiwan for the 2014 Venice Biennale, which we designed. Finally, teaching and curating. Taking a step back from building small scale buildings, now I've gotten into publishing more books, and I founded a publication series called Treatise, and we just finished publishing the first 14 books by various architects who are all teaching, who are all around my age, mid to late 30s. And in a way, if we submit an idea about manifesto and how does one go about starting a practice, this is the past decade, and thank you very much.
Okay, first of all, I want to introduce myself. I'm Benjamin Dillenburger, and I'm teaching here at the Masters of Architecture program since now 1.5 years. I want to explain you a little bit about my background, but I have to say also for me, it's very impressive to see the alumni culture here. I studied in Germany and in Switzerland, and both there's not such a strong alumni culture. So I think it's very important to see this exchange of different generations, and it's my pleasure to talk here to you. So my background is the last 6 years I researched at ETH Zurich in Höngeberg, which you can see here, where I developed my interest in technology and materiality and computational design. One can already see here in the campus of Höngeberg that Swiss architecture is of course famous for the orthogonal angles and very primitive geometric shapes. I always thought that architecture could also be more playful, especially when I was started to investigate into computational design. I think architecture should surprise, excite, and irritate. Architecture must be both an intellectual and an experimental endeavor, addressing not only the mind, but also all the senses. So in this image here, you see the location of the first project I want to show. That's on the upper right side. So Zurich is also, like Toronto, city with a lake. And that was a competition entry for a bath pavilion, beach pavilion. So this is actually on one of my favorite swimming spots at the Zurich Lake. And what you see here is actually not a pavilion, but it's a shower with a pavilion attached to it. So we thought we proposed the first building ever that is not sheltering, but actually producing the rain. But as we unfortunately didn't win this competition, I then had to really think about where to move now, because of course I cannot swim in the place where someone else builds this pavilion. So the next project was our competition entry, our contribution to the Architecture Biennale Rotterdam, and we decided to design a very specific city. So this should be a city with no beginning, no end, with no center, no periphery, a city which is open and secluding at the same time, and the physical appearance of the city should be very present in the exhibition. So we really wanted to somehow find a mode of representation to express what we are all, or I'm very fascinated about, is really the physical appearance of city, or the experience we can have. Of course, there was no possibility to draw such a city on a plan. So what I did also in my previous research is working with computational design, computational urban design. So we developed rules, and the computer distributed this city around the globe. The idea was that the spectator should walk around, follow all the streets. Indeed, there's really no dead end in this city, and experience this physical sphere from each angle. In fact, it's 5 meters high, 80 square meters of a city, and almost already a 3D printed construction. So these are 5,000 layers of cardboard. It was at the end 1.7 ton heavy, this city, and positioned only on 3 high-rise buildings. So at the end, we were very happy that this, in the exhibition, the ball didn't start to roll and collect all the visitors. But however, the mysterious thing is that this installation really disappeared in 2010 after the exhibition. We couldn't find it anymore. The curator just told us there were some people bringing it away. Since then, it's lost. But I continued with my research in computational design and digital fabrication with this project in 2012. That was actually a commission from the FRAC Centre Orléans in France. That's the French Architecture Museum. And the exhibition was entitled Naturalizing Architecture. So we decided to create an architecture that emerges between chaos and order, both natural and artificial, yet neither foreign or familiar. And that's why we called it also a digital grotesque. So there's actually 2 special things about this object. One is that we entirely designed it with computational design. We, my partner Michael Hansma, and me, were not able to design such a geometry or even to imagine such a geometry by hand or by just drawing. So we wrote a program, a software to design it. After this, we encountered a big problem, of course, how to construct it. That means we investigated a lot about marble constructions, milling, and so. But so what we found is a 3D printer that can actually print this. So this is one of the first 3D printed rooms in architecture. Now, competition entry, I was luckily, with the support of the Danish faculty, also finalist of the PS1 competition in 2015. And that was our proposal, Phenomena. So the competition is a temporary pavilion which should give shelter and refreshment to the spectators of the warm-up parties at PS1 in New York. And we've designed a second stage. Phenomena aims to spark curiosity and encourage visitors to interact with it, to touch it, to dive into it, to get lost in it, and ultimately become part of it. Phenomena defies classification. It is at once a performance space, an ornate fountain, and a projection screen. This one we didn't win, not. When I look at the winning project, I think we should have included maybe more of the douche project inside this one. And I'm happy to, now after being 1 year in Toronto, I had the first exhibition in Toronto also. That was a collaboration with the Design Exchange Museum. It's actually still open. It opened 2 weeks ago. And our project was called Arabesque Wall. What we did here is actually based on the concept of the digital grotesque, now increasing the resolution of the ornament that we can design. It's a 10 feet high wall, now printed in North America. And so what you don't see here is actually all the research that is done on the back side. So we developed a system of stereotomy, like how to compose such a structure. It's made from 12 stones to one single piece. Yeah, I want to end maybe with a quote from Cedric Rice. He said once, "Technology is the answer, but what was the question?" For me, technology is more an instrument, an opportunity to ask new questions to our profession. Thank you.
I want to thank you all on behalf of the audience and on behalf of myself. I can't imagine being in a more crazy group than you three. You are wild guys. So, you know, I think that the optimism, pleasure, hope, misbehaving, The playful, surprise, exciting, addressing all the senses. Like this is the notion that architecture design can actually envelop and engage the body in a very playful, whimsical way, and as well as thwart the, which I think your furniture too big, architecture too small, room too small, thwart the body in its, so that the engagement with, I think, with ideas is so strong in all of these projects. I really, it's amazing. I had a specific question, I think, for you, Jimenez, with the Trades series, publishing, because that's in visual art, this is a very hot topic now, and that many curators and artists are doing, are really interested in publishing. So do you?
So do you want me to talk about the project, or
Just yeah, talk about the project and how it's, why you think it's the right moment for that series.
When I went to school here, it's kind of funny to run into Carol. I really enjoyed spending time in that library, and I was looking at, earlier I was talking about people I looked up to. Pamphlet architecture had a huge impact on me when I was younger. I really enjoyed, let's say, leafing through the beginnings of people, and so now I have the opportunity to meet and work with Mark Mack, for example. But the Mark Mack that I know now is very different from the Mark Mack that was documented in pamphlet architecture. And so I wanted to, I think, as I travel, as I teach, on reviews or serve as jurors, go attend people's openings, began to identify people whose future I'm really curious about. And I would also think that a piece of documentation like that for someone else far into the future would be very beneficial, a point of comparison between now and then.
Many galleries in this country, and also the U.S. and Germany and the UK, are doing small publications to accompany the exhibition. So I think it's a forward-thinking moment that is very interesting. Claude, I wanted to share an experience I had at Sugar Beach with you. I was having a drink, with my partner, and we looked out, and all of a sudden there was a sort of a boat came up and was positioned right there, and there was a screen on the boat. And did you know? And then gradually people started to come with picnic baskets and chairs and to sit in front of this screen. It was movie night. Did you know that they do that?
Yes, I know now they're doing that, but when we designed it, there was not
Nothing
that
there.
was not existing.
No, there was nothing there. It was like a revelation to Toronto. I want to thank you on behalf of every citizen. You opened the water.
I would say that maybe the success of that park or that place, it's open-ended, right? It seems that it's not fixed to a. We could imagine that the beach is a beach, but I think it's more than that, and it's amazing how it's being used to represent things, to film millions of things that we would have not thought of. And and for me, this is when it becomes a real success. That it's just right. It's not ours anymore. It's at the city. It's for the people, and right. There's a kind of a democratic aspect in it that it's very important.
Well, I mean, Toronto is one of the places that unfortunately has, for many years, I've been here since '68, has squandered and wasted the waterfront and never done anything of very much value.
It's changing.
And it's really changing. But for me, I think Sugar Beach really signaled that in the city. I know that there will be others here who think that.
There's a lot of stuff going on, and I think it's just I think we're at the turning point of having the feeling that the presence of the waterfront within the city. with that phenomena, right? Which is a kind of a joy and hope, and it's given back to the people. It's very, it's at the point of just exploding. June 19, with the Queens Quay Boulevard that's going to be open. So that's going to be the kind of a major linkage of all that. So I think that's when it's going to turn, and you're going to feel it more. Yes.
I'll be there.
Good.
Yes. Benjamin, I wondered if I had a chance to see the arabesque wall, and I wondered if you talked about the backside of it, and I will say I didn't understand. I didn't get that. So would you speak a little bit more about it? It's an astonishing work to look at. Because I always thought you had made those slides up.
Yeah, this one, yeah.
They were like...
Looks like rendering almost.
No, it looks like Photoshop, right?
Yeah.
Like, the guy who made the stuff, sure, 3D printing, oh yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of light, that's what we do, huh? We put special light. No, but I was a bit short on this point also. Of course, in this project, the ambition is to create such a delicate, ornamented wall, but to be able to do so, we of course have to also think about how to fabricate it, how to there's no way, no other way how to create such a structure from stone. So we developed again software to split this element in a way. I don't know if you noticed how many parts there are, so that should be covered. And actually on the backside you see all the details that are maybe not so beautiful, but they are also like very unique, because you can create really different details when you 3D print. In this case, you can include all the alignment pins and so on this.
Do you want to talk about the material too?
Yeah, that's stone, so printed sandstone, this one. So it's as solid, as structural, has the same structural capacity as sandstone. Yeah. Now we just got a research grant, so I can continue with this research and start to build a vault with the sandstone. Yeah.
From the Grant Foundation? From the Grant Foundation, yeah. Congrats.
Thanks. Come on.
I wonder if you each might want to just speak about how because we're all engaged and we're here in Daniels right now, engaged in education, and you've each addressed in a way where your formation came from, and do you want to think about the future at all? Our deans are going to be addressing this, of course, later, our deans, current and former, but what do you think? What's important to right now?
I think earlier there was this question, 50 years from now, what would you regret, and so forth. And I if a question like that comes up, the first thing I would be thinking is doing some math, I guess. So 50 years ago would be 1965, and what, do we regret anything from then? And to be quite honest, I think future is maybe plastic material. There are many futures. There are many futures. That's the beauty of being in school. It's because when you're maybe 20-something, you can imagine 5, 10, 20 different futures, which all plausible. All plausible depending on what you do. And the function of the teacher is not necessarily telling this person what's right or wrong, but offering many possible paths, and therefore, a mass exposure to the types of diets that are out there seems to me the most important responsibility. At least that's what I assume when I teach.
I think in 50 years, that's an interesting perspective also, but as an architect, we actually would create buildings that are, in the best case, still there in 50 years. So we really have to live with the consequences of our work now.
Well, I think education is one of the primal thing, and I think it's so important. And I believe also that's when you are able also to develop tools. The more tools you have, I think the more possibility that you have. And something that you can never forget, that education, once you have it, it can never be taken away from you, right? So I think it's one of the most important things that the kids must have. And I think we always we're always on constant education, right? We always learn, keep open, trying to right? It's never done. It's
Never done.
ongoing. Never.
Yeah.
I wish sometime, but it's like, yeah.
Yeah. Who's influencing you now? Or what?
So it's kind of funny to be sitting sandwiched here, because some of the things that I look at and think about these days. There are certain individuals out there. For example, one of my closest friends, Andrew Kovacs, is somebody. He runs a archive called Archive of Affinities. You can find this on the internet. And so, what happens when you exhaust your source material in history? I guess he starts to stitch them back together, almost like a collage project, which is a sensitive word because collage was declared dead by certain individuals maybe a decade or two ago. But then suddenly this is making a resurgence. So this guy Andrew Kovacs, but then Mark Foster Gage at Yale, he's doing this project called Kit Bashing where he downloads like free source 3D models, and he would glue them together in Rhino or Maya, and then he would print them. But this leads me to be thinking about people like Greg Lynn, for example, early on in his career when he was taking puppets or bears or like toys and glue them into the base of a table, and now looking at thinking about your teddy bear landscape. And as well, your work, I think, it's kind of there's something in the air that's making a resurgence.
Yeah, it might be related to this. I think we're living in a time where we have much more access to knowledge or information in general. So worldwide, we get our inspiration from. That's maybe the answer to work with this as an artist or as an architect with the inspiration that you access is to start to assemble things together or try. I just saw one of the first Cabinet of Wonders, and I think these works are maybe referring to this. We take something that we find somewhere and it's inspiring and we use it in a different way or assemble it together. And that's, I think, also really new, maybe, that we can share so much knowledge. That's also important for education, and we maybe need to develop new strategies how to deal or how to teach them, actually.
How to sort through all that.
Yeah, exactly. How to curate.
Because,
so it's more or less a curation, maybe. Yeah?
Because the Wunderkammer is is a thing, and so that you could look at. But I mean, the internet is like, the ultimate, clickbait Wunderkammer. It's like a horror story of time wasting, going down the drain. But on the other hand, I try to keep up with things. But who is influencing you?
Well, I would say many, but I would say I'm classified as a postmodernist in the real sense of word. And last week at the conference, I actually simply described a little bit two of my major mentors. One would be Frederick Law Olmsted for the kind of for who he was, a late bloomer, as a journalist interested in nature and interested in society more than nature, and then manufacturing nature for people to enjoy in cities that were polluted. And so that's one end of the spectrum. And on the other one, it's Martha Schwartz. When I was a student in the 80s, she was coming out as this flamboyant new model of providing visual art as a source of inspiration in the making of landscape. So I think she was certainly, for me, the big one that just made it, yes, it's possible. So I guess from their totally different end of the spectrum, and I think that's where I would say postmodern fits well, because I take a bit of this, and borrow maybe somewhere else, and watch the youth, the way they interact, see a possibility in the crack of the system, and then tie a kind of create a narrative that connects the whole thing together. So it's open-ended.
Do you have questions of each other? Should we open it up?
I think maybe the point, the narrative that you mentioned, I think in your work, Jimenez, it's very interesting, and that was also part of your first question, maybe this interplay between book or literature and architecture. And I think we also, when I design things, I sometimes see the architecture as something that we can read or where we can find our narrations. I wonder, how do you define your position between these, or are you trying to merge them? Or when I see the comic, for example.
I see. I mean, I think maybe let's say this attitude about writing and making comes from a tradition of art history, and what gets remained decades from now or even centuries from now, and that maybe shouldn't concern anyone who makes, but somehow because that was in the education, it's maybe in the back of all of our minds what gets remained, and perhaps writing about it or making a let's say easy delivery of sorts or difficult delivery. But I guess I had a.
I think you in your the project with the comic building, actually you go a step further. You really develop already. You don't describe architecture, but you create architecture with words or with the images, and that's I think very interesting.
Thanks. I mean, I guess maybe coming back here, we were also talking about sensation.
Yes.
Like last panel, we were offline talking about less science, more sensation. And I was kind of curious what Claude, what you thought about that.
Well, I think that, I guess in my field, I would say that we're not, in terms of landscape, I think you're doing it's real art, right? I think in my field, I'm a little bit more constrained by certain functional reality, but I think it's good once we are able to elevate it to something else, and then that's when it starts changing category. And that's why I would say that the science is fundamental, because it solves problem. My critique of it is that sometimes it's the kind of a notion, there's other phenomena that could and should be brought on top of it or mixed within it that will make it more fluid, more natural, and less a thing that has solved the problem, but I think something that brings in, and we enter the world of phenomenology, that things in the senses that are added to it, and I think that's why then the public can grab it, because at the ultimate, in my practice, I'm interested to touch the public, right, the general public, and I think I'm sure both in your work, and you do that.
I mean, so I'm a big fan of movies. I spend a lot of time, I'm sure many of you, but I often think of architecture and landscape architecture as stage sets or backdrops to an environment or backdrop to a culture. It describes, even the characters may or may not need to be saying much, but the scene would describe the culture of the city.
The word says it, stage set, right? Bang. It set a mood right away.
I share this interest also, and it is it's inherent in architecture. I think all the constraints and so also thoughts about sustainability. This is absolutely necessary, but it's not sufficient to create architecture. So we always have to add this extra values, and it's when we often talk about performance criteria of architecture, then it's not only being warm, but also like what we see actually, what we get as stimulation of when we look at something, and when maybe something in architecture can also attract someone to move him closer to, that people want to explore the architecture, and these are all also values. They are maybe a little bit more difficult to measure. There was this researcher Rittel in Germany, Horst Rittel, and he compared like the difference between the very scientific problem maybe, which would be like a mission, so we want to travel to Mars or to Moon. There it's very easy to define the goal. We accomplish the mission when we reach Mars, but design problems are a little bit different. We don't know exactly what is the goal, and this is then a part of the discourse. That would be then also a difference to the pure science maybe.
Where does sustainability come into? Because I think when I look at all of this work, that's not what I think about, and yet I know that that's It's not a criticism, but
My friend and colleague, Michael Osman, who now I teach with, he says, Jimenez, you're so sustainable, you don't build.
But this is when you are sustainable, right? This is true sustainable. For me, sustainability is good common sense, period. And nowadays, it's becoming such a big thing. And it's a kind of a 101 that you can never forget. We've been working on LEED Platinum project that it's Excel spreadsheet endless that you have to fill. And you have problem, and they want you to plant your trees in granular when you want to do in soil. So what is sustainability, right? I think at the end, we all know, and I guess for me, growing on the farm, was kind of a 101 lesson. There's a kind of, and then it's common sense. We can't never forget common sense, ever. And sustainability is also not just with the natural, but it's also within the urban living, right? Taking your bicycle, going to the beach, I think is sustainable. We're installing the same pink balls 5 years after it. That's sustainable, right? They're being paid, and right? It's not. I think it's a very wide open. It's an attitude.
And I think when we think about certain materials and certain ways that materials are used, that sustainable can also be very. I mean, the word I would use would be maybe predictable, and as you say, that this is where you have to plant these trees here, but where does how do you get to the other side of that, where you can have some engagement through joy, through pleasure, through, and it's, I mean, is it just a birthday cake, or is it, I mean.
I'm afraid, I think it's one thing that I would be afraid in 50 years. I don't want the world to become flat.
Yes.
And I think there's always room for a bit of cosmetic, right? A bit of makeup, right? People love accessory because they add value. So I think within this world of just becoming green, where can you inject some moment of wow?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to become healthy, but a bit of life within it, a different kind of life that triggers it by contrast, works so well together. Right? So
I would agree. Maybe we will open it up. Are there questions? Comments?
Actually, 4. Yeah, no, I will respond to that. So, certainly when I was here, spending time in the library, I paid close attention to the, I guess, pamphlet number from number 1 to number 15. Number 15 was published in 1995. It was by Labius Wood, and I also looked beyond 15, and I guess the process became, I guess, Princeton Architectural Press by that point had acquired pamphlet, and the process became a little more, let's say, designed by committee, and Stephen Hall was gradually more and more removed from that process. And I think part of that also had to do with the fact that he was not young anymore by that point, and so in my mind, from, what was it, 81 to 95 seemed to be the right time span, roughly 15 years or so, and the number of concentrated work was somewhere between 14 to 16. And so that was the logic, and that's also the age group difference between the people that I eventually curated. The youngest was 1984 born, and the oldest was 72. And so to my mind, I was maybe kind of creating this timeline, and we would do it while we're young. It's not. I didn't think it was a work that we should continue when we're not young anymore. And yeah.
Like disco dancing?
Like disco
Thing.
dancing, like wearing makeup.
I promise I won't. That kind of thing.
But you could still disco dance when you're older, I think.
At a wedding. Other comments, questions? Richard.
Benjamin, you reflected on your experience at the ETH and your education in Europe. And ETH is really one of the best schools of architecture in Europe. So I thought it would be interesting for you as someone who's not a graduate of the school to reflect on how you see the differences between the kind of education activities that happen there and what your experience thus far has been, not just here, but maybe more broadly in North America, but in particular, you've been here for a year and a half. I thought that might be interesting for people to hear about.
Yeah, so there is definitely a lot of differences. So I'm slowly adapting now after 1 year being in North America. And one big difference is already I think, and that's what I really appreciate here also, is the discussion culture or discourse that is done over projects. And then at ETH, just to give you an example, the thesis at ETH is just handing in documents, and there's no presentation at all. And here I experienced then hours of discussion about the project, which is very interesting and nice to hear so different opinions about that. So in this sense, I think here, yeah, there's more of a verbal, rhetorical discussion about the works. In terms of focus, also, of course, ETH is very technical also. So here, I think the spectrum of designs you can see is wider. Maybe also it's very, as I said, this example of handing in documents makes the students adapt a lot to the formalities of the design. So here I see a bigger design freedom actually in the students. So more experiments, more courage. That's about education, maybe the big differences already. I mean, I can only speak mostly for a part of ETH also because it's a bit bigger, so I don't have the overall overview of the faculty. Yeah. But what I also, now I traveled a lot around, and I think still the exchange of academia is more and more important, and it's also more and more easy. So I love to invite people from other universities and the other way around. So this is, I don't know how it was like in older days, but I think now there's a lot of exchange through, and people know each other very well, are very much connected over the continents even. Yeah.
Hi. I'm wondering about the role of dialogue in your own process of creativity. Like, is it a kind of a solo experience where you kind of have your ideas of spring, fully formed from your head, like Athena? Or is the role of dialogue, collaboration, conversation, how important is that?
To all of us? Or?
Yeah, that's just an open question to the panel.
Personally, I really enjoyed thinking about dead people. So for example, John Hayduk is somebody I think about very often, or even, let's say, John Hayduk is somebody that I often think about. Or even someone like Palladio. Bureau Spectacular is a practice that I founded in 2008. And, on average, we have somewhere between 2 to 4 people. There were times we expanded to 10. But the best way I could describe it, it's a band that keeps on changing drummers. And, the frontman's never left so far. And so we would sit around, 2 or 3 or 4 of us would sit around and ask each other, so what do you think of the Diamond House? Like, or what do you think of the Wall House, for example? Or what's up with Villa Rotunda, where it's a nightmare. Every entrance is exactly the same as every exit. It's as though no action has any consequence. So we would talk about stuff like that. How do you get in? How do you get out? What buildings do? And so to maybe reflect on that idea of creativity, we're maybe deeply not creative. We often identify standards in order to ask back the standards.
I want to venture a question that connects publication to engagement of the public. Because we're having very mean discussions about the cost of public works. So for example, Claude's Sugar Beach has recently been a political football related to the cost of the umbrellas. Interestingly enough, the way the umbrellas are made is intended to make them sustainable. If they were made cheaper, they wouldn't have value. So the question I want to ask is, to what extent do you have to think of yourself as propagandists to engage the public in the way? So the pamphlet was a tradition of the French Revolution, that you would issue pamphlets and they would kind of create an action. So I'm interested in the extent to which you have both a value and an obligation to play this sort of propagandist role, so that this dialogue of poverty that goes on in the press can be changed into one in which the kind of cultural production is seen as something that both involves risks, but also value to that risk, which Sugar Beach could be said to be evidence.
Well, when we do things in the office, at some point you have to start thinking a little bit, because then you put the pressure so hard on. But I have to say that once we have an idea on something, we somehow believe that we're trying to gel it, and then we're trying to understand the value of what it could bring, and then defining and dialogue with the stakeholders and all that. And I think that reinforces the value of the idea. And I think there's a bit of also, I think in order to create value, it's also associated a little bit with risk taking. Right? And I think if there's no value added, if there's no risk taken. So I think it's how do you measure it, and how far do you go with it, or how far we have enough room to let go for. But
I think the question of propaganda is really interesting, because then we talk about the graphic design of politics, or the graphic image making of politics. And so maybe back to the question of sustainability, I think there are very specific choices of color and tone, and even materiality to the types of images that would communicate a political ideology. And for me, I think I would say the work that we do maybe also describes a pretty specific political ideology. And the colleagues that and people, even people who are not my colleagues, when I look at their work, maybe that's one angle of evaluation. What palette of typefaces are they choosing to communicate what?
Yeah, definitely. There's like a big audience also especially in new media, that mostly works with images or talks that are set up in a very specific presentations that are all look like an Apple presentation for products, but for architecture. And in this sense, propaganda would be that there's a big you address mostly technical problems that are relatively easy to transport in these discussions, and that relates also to the color scheme that you would select, that it's more perceived as scientific. Also, it's not the case, but I think it's maybe that's maybe also an important part of how to sell your project as an architect that we have to learn to adapt somehow. But most important, of course, is then to stay close to your ideas in a way. But selling the project is also an important factor.
I would bring it back too to the first thing that Claude said, which is courage.
Yeah.
And I think that that what Barry, what you're talking about is the unfortunate but very contemporary condition of the gutless, the absolute and utter gutlessness of leadership that will allow the city to crumble, to be ugly, to be all of those things, because, you know, we all know why, so we won't go through it. But without leadership, I think those things, sometimes you're under a little, under a little protective, shield that will let very really amazing projects be completed before the bean counters start nattering at you about everything. And I know there are probably some out there, I'm sorry, but, you're urban planners, but I think it's courage, which is would speak to what you're talking about too. I don't think it's about propaganda necessarily. I think it's trying to clarify the issue, clarify what the project is, and then going forward from there.
I prefer the word courage than propaganda, because then it's more neutral. And I think in a territory that, right, we work in the kind of a public domain, I think you can be neutral, but you can also pass messages. But in instance, I think for us alone, we can't do anything. We need a client that will also need the same level of courage than we do. And I think the other one after, it's the approval process. They also are part of the equation, because too often they say no, they go back to standard, right? So it's just, I think it's a kind of an equation with three peers of, it's all about risk-taking, but having the courage of believing in something and having the intelligence to see through that it could go, right? And I think the umbrellas, the beautiful thing about it is that they were able to sustain all of the kind of the politics that were attached to it. They did their own job because they were well built, and we all thought about it, the approval process, and the client also. It was all, right? And this is where the dialogue is important, because it was debated over and over without losing insight that was something that could have created a kind of a commotion. And I think that's where the success reside, because we all took a risk.
Yes, we're almost out of time, but yes, go ahead.
Talk I gave earlier, I referred to the International Institute of Design, which was the AA summer session that Alvin Boyarsky ran out of the Architectural Association. And what I was aware of at the time was that the participants in the scene in London had a sense of the kind of oppressive hold on cultural dialogue of the establishment. And they kind of looked to the success of rock music as a model to create a scene in which not only would you think about your own personal work, which they're presenting, but you think about presenting in a kind of provocative context that opens up public dialogue, that makes more space for the public to enter into and start to see value and have a more sophisticated reaction to the voices of the establishment who like these discussions to revolve around, simple discussions of technique and budget.
Rock music.
It was 1980.
I was going to say, you too.
As another cultural practice, as a way of creating a scene, not simply for yourself,
Yes.
but not simply relying on your own courage, but to create a kind more space for other people to advance their courage and for the public to actually enter into the dialogue.
So the question would be, what other cultural practices are you looking at now? Rock music is kind of more of a maybe.
Well, Jimenez has already said drawing and curating, movies.
Culinary arts.
Cooking.
Right,
No, restaurants.
yeah. Benjamin.
Yeah, a different question. I feel for me, it's a very traditional traveling, actually. So and that's what I'm looking. But in terms of community, I think, of course, I'm connected to the online communities. That there are blogs and.
Claude.
I would say everything, right? The everyday life
Yeah.
and seeing opportunities when everything, right? You said, how can you turn something that's, right, by changing one element in the equation and then the whole thing is, right, explodes. So often that's what I like to do. You're somewhere, you watch thing and say, right, I'm going to change one thing within this and what would happen. So I do create my little imagination, right, distort something. And then from within this, it's the same as in design process. So it's totally open-ended.
I want to thank all three of you for a wonderful session. Thank you, audience, for great questions. And we'll thank you to invite you to come back in half an hour, I think, for the final word of the day from our deans.